On that note, I'm going to hand over to the prof to then unpack the content, and then we'll take additions, and then we'll get into the Q&A session. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Mr. Minyeda, and thank you to representatives of the various media houses who are in attendance of this media briefing. And I want to thank my colleagues for having found the time to join the media briefing. Just to state the obvious, the media briefing is about the recent mission which was dispatched by President Ramaphosa to the United States of America, constituted a delegation and asked me to head that delegation to travel to the United States of America to interact with our interlocutors on a number of issues. But I need to say that in essence, the interaction was really a normal thing which happens between friends. The relationship between South Africa and the United States of America, like all other relations between countries or amongst countries, has certain baseline requirements. One, critically important, that parties to the relationship find occasions whereby they get together to review the functional status of their relationship. Also, as they review that functional status of their relationship, to also calibrate or recalibrate that relationship where necessary. Reset the relationship again if and when is deemed necessary to do so. So the delegation went to the United States of America. We had interactions with a broad number of stakeholders to this relationship, ranging from lawmakers in the Senate and in Congress, as well as counterpart practitioners in various sectors of the administration of the United States. Just to give an indication of that breadth, I'm saying besides congressional members and senators, we also met the leadership of the national, their national intelligence services, both civilian and military. We met practitioners from sectors of government who deal with issues of trade and economic relationships generally, both bilateral and multilateral. And we in the spirit of what I said about the baseline requirements, we spent some time looking at some of the issues which on occasions have caused consternation, either on our part about what our interlocutors are doing on the international stage, or vice versa. We again reminded ourselves as to where this relationship of ours comes from, and we reaffirmed our commitment, both sides, to make sure that this relationship continues to be handled with care, both for the sake of our respective countries and more broadly for the sake of the world. We spent some time socializing ourselves to a higher level of receptivity to difference, because we realize that in as much as this relationship, it's based on the consideration of matters that are in our mutual interest, there are times when our own understanding of our national interest or their own understanding of their national interest may give rise to different positioning on matters either multilateral or bilateral. And we recommitted ourselves to making sure that if differences arise at any given moment, we will make sure that we discharge our responsibility, joint responsibility of managing those differences in order to ensure that the greater good is not sacrificed on the altar of such differences as may arise at any given moment. We spoke at length about, for instance, the voting that has happened on several occasions at the United Nations on the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Noting, of course, that our teams of diplomats at the UN are in regular contact on this issue. We have not always seen eye to eye on every aspect of that conflict. I think when we come to the question time, you will see what we mean in the detail about not having seen eye to eye on the on that conflict. There are times when some wondered why, when there is a resolution sponsored by the United States of America before the House at the United Nations, we either voted against it or we abstained. As I say, we will explain in the detail why we would find ourselves in a situation where we are not necessarily in full agreement with each other. But you will see that in instances where we added to our voting an explanation of vote, there are substantive matters which are entailed in that explanation of vote, which then talks to the issue which many have called the ostensible neutrality of South Africa as far as this conflict is concerned. We need to explain that we indeed are actively non-aligned as far as that conflict is concerned. To say we are actively non-aligned does not mean that we don't have a view about wars generally. We are anti-war, and we will do everything necessary and possible at all material times to make sure that avoidable wars should be avoided, and we will contribute to ensuring indeed that they are avoided. We will make absolutely sure that should wars break out, our contribution will always be calculated at helping the parties and everybody else to bring such conflicts to an end at the earliest possible time. Between us and our US interlocutors, I'm not talking about how the parties felt at the beginning of the engagement, because then I was detaining you on the starting blocks of that engagement. I'm saying between us and our interlocutors, there is an understanding that it is possible for us, that is South Africa and the United States, to, from our respective vantage positions, to align our actions in such a way that those actions can move the needle in the right direction. I'll give you an example about that. There was, oh, by the way, I am in ongoing telecontact with my counterpart in the United States, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. We talk about this conflict and many issues of interest to our two countries. And as we do so, on one occasion, the National Security Advisor was expressing a concern about the disruption of food supply chains as a result of the blockade that the Russians had instituted against the movement of grain cargo on the Black Sea. And I understood why he was raising it with us, because he is aware of our proximity to Russia. Discussed and reported this matter to President Ramaphosa, who immediately understood what needs to be done. interacted with the Russians. Without boring you with detail, that made us, in that sense, on that occasion, catalysts for what eventually was an agreement between the United Nations, Turkey, and Russia to enable that blockade to be removed. Now, that disruption of food supply chain actually talks to another topic of concern, particularly to faraway countries. I'm saying faraway countries because I'm talking about countries that are located far from the theater of this conflict. You know, you take an African country like Egypt, which relies 80% for grain, staple diet, on supplies that come from that region. This is, as I'm saying, just a representative case of a problem which is experienced by many people around the world who are suffering collective damage from that conflict in Ukraine and Russia. So it has to be understood that when we handle a matter of this kind, we should handle it with care because of the hardships which it is causing on humanity all around the globe. So I'm saying that between us and our interlocutors, we understand what it is that we can do together. We understand also that our relationship has to be delicately managed in the interest of our respective countries and in the interest of the world as a whole. Now, this must also be the context in which we look at the issue of Lady R. We became aware that a Russian ship docked at the base in Simonstown. We also became aware of allegations that are made as to what kind of business that ship was conducting. We immediately, upon becoming aware of this, and when I'm saying we, I'm speaking as the Special Envoy of the President, the President felt that he needs to understand this, get to the bottom of it. Our interlocutors got to know from us as to what it is that we are doing about this matter. Of course, they conveyed their concerns before we traveled to the US about this matter to our government. But as I say, we are acting on this matter not only because we understand the consternation of our friends globally, that includes the United States of America, but because it is in our own interest to understand what happened and whether what happened was ethically correct. Those are issues that we are looking at in the detail. We discussed with our interlocutors. We told them what we are doing about it. We told them why we are doing it and why we understand their consternation and why we understand that not only them, but the world will need to know more than it does at the moment about that incident. So they obviously will hear from us on this matter. And as you know, well, maybe you don't, because I have not said this, we expressed a preference which was just a reiteration of what we have said to each other before, that some issues such as this one need to be better handled through the normal channels of communication that we have established. Because megaphone diplomacy has the unfortunate tendency of creating unavoidable misunderstandings between parties. So I noticed that our friends in the United States, White House, the State Department have been in the public domain, indeed confirming that we discussed this matter. We will come back to each other, and they will also assist us by making available to us such information as they may have, which might assist our process of trying to get to the bottom of this issue. We then also discussed matters economic. And as you know, the AGOA program, which is really about opportunities for African countries to access market opportunities for their products. That program is up for review. The overriding intention, as we were made to understand, is to extend it. Yes, its time is nearing. It is nearing its end point. They are contemplating renewing it. They are contemplating also recalibrating it. And of course, in the course of what I call the avoidable misunderstandings, there are some in the lawmaking fraternity, policymaking fraternity in the United States, who thought that some of our actions are suggesting that we are not as non-aligned as we would profess to be, and therefore there is a need on their part to consider using coercive instrumentalities of diplomacy to convey their concern. We spent a lot of time discussing this issue with the lawmakers from the Senate, congressional members, and everybody else. And there is an understanding between us that so important is this relationship that we should not allow ourselves to walk away from each other at the slightest irritation. But also when we got to understand each other better, and also understanding that our relationship is so profound that it cannot be judged solely by where we put a cross on a proposed resolution at the United Nations. We will need to improve our lines of communication with all branches of policy making in the United States in order to ensure that we don't get confused when mixed signals emanate either from our side or from their side. So we are agreed that we need to continue to work together, but of course we will also be working together with other parties who have an interest in the continuation of AGOA to make sure that when the time for decision making comes, we take decisions that are objectively in the interests of our continent and the United States as our partner, as our continent's partner in AGOA. I must say that in one instance, we encountered a lawmaker who actually said, you know, I had already penned a resolution for discussion before the House. Now I know that I was canvassing my colleagues to support that resolution. Now I know why it is important to say to my colleagues, now that I have this information, this draft resolution of mine is not an appropriate response to the problem as I originally understood it. So in short, I am saying that we, from the point of view of what we were sent to do by our principal, we are satisfied, and so too is he, because we have briefed him and the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. We briefed him and he's satisfied that the objectives of the mission for which he sent us to the United States have been realized. Thank you very much for indulging us. I do imagine indeed that you have questions which my colleagues and I are available to answer. Thank you, Mr. Munyala.
Thank you very much, Prof. I'd like to acknowledge, in thanking you, Prof, the presence of the Finance Minister in the room. Minister Godongwana is here with us, and I'm sure he'd like to have an opportunity to weigh in at some point. But for now, I'm going to then open the floor for questions. If you could just do the usual, introduce yourself and the media house you're representing, and then let's get your question. And then the envoys plus the finance minister who's in the room will assist in responding to the questions. I want to start with Peter Fabricius, and I see John from the New York Times, and then somebody.
FM.
Sophie Mukwena, SABC, Ngana, Kosinati, Gabriele, and then Karen Mon. In that order, please. Let's get your questions. We'll have another round.
Thank you very much, Claes, and thank you very much, Mr. Mufamadi. The Lady R issue, as you know, has been very, very fraught, and I just wanted to know, were you at any point presented with concrete evidence that suggested that the Russian ship had been uploaded with ammunition, weapons, etc., from South Africa, or were you told that by intelligence officials that they had that information? And could I also just ask, if I may, you said that you believe your mission is accomplished. Is there any action apart from improving communication which either side has agreed to take in order to improve the relationship in the future and to avoid the possibility of us being removed from AGOA, etc.? Thank you.
Should I deal with that question, Mr. Munyala?
Prof, yeah, if you prefer for us to do it like that, we could. I wanted to take the other questions and perhaps when we respond.
No, I think in order to do justice to questions, let's deal with them as they arise.
Very good. Go ahead, Prof. Go ahead, Prof.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Fabricius, your first question is about the concreteness of
Yes.
the information shared. Now, I said there is a process underway to get to the bottom of this matter. The pronouncement or the call on the concreteness or otherwise of what has been shared so far has to be made at the end of that process. Otherwise, it will be irresponsible and preemptive of us to start commenting on the quality of the information shared. But I repeat, there was something that was said to us, which will then be channelized into that process of getting to the bottom of the matter. There is an indication that there may be supplementary information, but this is not the only source of information, of course. So I'd rather you allow us, or you allow me to stay where my feet are. Don't push us to start speculating about what the process will find. Sorry, you may remind me what was the second prong of your question?
Yeah, I said that you pronounced at the end of your presentation that you believe your mission is accomplished. And I wanted to ask you whether there was agreements on by concrete actions from both sides of the relationship in order to ensure that the relationship did in fact return to stability, if you like, and that we were not removed from AGOA or whatever.
Yeah, well, you know, the question of improving on our communication, I think you know too that the biggest room in the world is room for improvement. When we talk about the need to improve our communication, we are not beating ourselves up, both sides, to say we have not been communicating. I told you about, as an example, the ongoing communication between me and the National Security Advisor of the United States. Recently, well, late last year, the National Director of Intelligence led a delegation which came here. There were meetings. There are channels of communication which have always been in place. They keep being reviewed and improved on from time to time. So there are communications, for instance, interaction between the Minister of Finance and the Secretary of Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, the Minister of Trade with his counterpart. They are ongoing. But obviously, when you talk about recalibration, it means that you want them to operate at a higher level of efficiency. So I think it should suffice for us to say to you that commitment was reaffirmed, basically, was reaffirmed. The specific issues we were discussing were symptomatic of what happens if we lower our guard with respect to issues of communication. Now, AGOA, it's important again to understand this. There may well be a sentiment in America that, AGOA is privileging people who are showing duplicity, people who are saying they are non-aligned, but they don't show commitment to non-alignment. I'm saying there may be such a sentiment, but it is not the only sentiment. On matters of international relations, the discourse is always a plurivocal one. There are shades of opinion. There are people who don't agree with that sentiment. But we did not only limit ourselves to meeting with one side to that debate. We met with everybody, and understanding, by the way, that the existence of plurality of views on a matter like this is not a peculiarity of the United States. We have it here. Every other country has such plurality of views, which must be encouraged, by the way. People must have platforms to debate and discuss and so on. But I was saying to you that to the extent that some people were taking a position which was based on not sufficiently understanding where we come from on some of these issues, including AGOA and so on, to the extent that those people said, we now understand. We now understand. We thought that that was an important development. But it's not only, the mission is not only about talking to people who disagree with you because you are afraid AGOA we will be excluded from the AGOA dispensation. It's also important in the engagement to have a more complex take or discussion about this matter to understand in the first place why AGOA is in our mutual interest. And as I said earlier, if there are problems which stand in the way of ensuring that we mutually continue to benefit from AGOA, we remove such obstacles. So I think if you understand the sort of nuances that I'm trying to convey, you will then understand that we were not discussing AGOA by way of treating it as our discussion as a collective bargaining forum. We were discussing AGOA and other issues as to our very important relationship and asking ourselves, in what way can we handle these matters such that the greater good is not harmed? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Before I take Mesofumi Mukwena, Digi Dango, you wanted to weigh in, and then we'll take Sofumi Mukwena's question.
Thank you, Tyson. Just given the events of the last couple of days, perhaps important to state that, what we did get in terms of the Lady R was the same allegations that there may have been ammunition or whatever loaded or offloaded, but there was no concrete evidence presented to us from any of the people that we met. The intelligence services said they may be able to share this with us once the inquiry gets going. But during our stay there was no concrete evidence presented, aside from restating the allegations. I think it's important to note that, because I note that there's a New York Times article where one of the senators is quoted as saying they presented concrete evidence, and I think we need just to correct that. So I just wanted to add that in at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG. Memkwen.
Thank you, President. Dr. Mufamadi Mukwena from the SABC. The issue of Lady R. Why is the president appointing a committee or a commission led by the retired judge? That will involve a lot of money, when the president can get information from the committee that deals with sales of arms. He can get information from the Minister of Defense, who must be informed in terms of what's happening in these different bases, or the Chief of the Defense Force. Why are we spending money investigating this, giving it a weight? Because when you announce an investigation, it means there's something. The second question in relation to AGOA, are you able to share with us how much South Africa stands to lose should this agreement not be renewed, or should we not be part of this agreement? And finally, maybe the Minister of Finance can also assist. The issue of the war in Ukraine has divided the world, particularly the developed North and the developing South, or the G77 plus China, or the South-South. Clearly going forward, addressing these concerns only with the United States of America is not going to assist South Africa in terms of strengthening its bilateral relations with different countries. With the G20 summit coming, are you hoping to assist the president as an envoy, continuing with what you did in the United States, with other countries such as Russia and China, to put the view of South Africa clearly, and so that we are not caught in a crossfire as a country? Thanks.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Ms. Mukwena. Let me start with the issue of AGOA. How much does South Africa stand to lose? Someone may also want to come in and talk to you about rands and cents. But I want to talk to this issue somewhat differently. And then you must think back to our engagement with our US counterparts, because we thought that this matter needed to be looked at also at a higher level of analysis. You see, the continent, Africa, has got a program called Agenda 2063. We are treating ourselves as a continent, as a free zone, trade-free zone in the making. Why are we doing this? One, we are trying to address a problem which has roiled African economies from the 1980s, the problem of deindustrialization. So we are committed to re-industrializing and the question that arises is, does AGOA have a role to play in that equation of re-industrializing African economies? Then you will have to, in order to answer that question, you will have to answer other questions before that. The role and place of Africa in the global economy. You've got 50 plus economies which are vertically integrated into the globalized economy, vertically and differentially integrated into this globalized economy. Many of these economies are resource rich, but they are unable, as they trade in the world economy, to fetch good value out of their participation in that economy, because their economies are fragile. They don't have capacity for capital formation, something which is indispensable to this process of re-industrializing your economy. They have weak fiscal base. So South Africa, it's this one country that has got a relatively more advanced industrial base. In this equation, therefore, it plays a very important role in catalyzing the re-industrialization of the rest of the continent, starting with the Southern African region. So when you think about the role and place of South Africa in AGOA, if you oversimplify things to how many cents and rands South Africa stands to lose, you will then be failing to understand that South Africa's position is inextricably bound up with the position of the rest of the countries on the continent. If you ask the leader of BMW or Mercedes-Benz in Germany, they will tell you that they spend sleepless nights. Not now. This was at least told to me by Mr. Oliver Zipse, the president of BMW in 2006, globally president of BMW. He says, no, I spend sleepless nights when I try to contemplate what would happen to me if AGOA were to become unavailable to South Africa, because he accesses that lucrative market through the assembly, the cars that are assembled in South Africa. So you need to understand the world in terms of how many countries make it up, but also understand it in its interconnectedness, so that the question does not become how much South Africa is likely to lose by way of rands and cents. Sophie, remind me your second question. Of course, my colleagues will come in also, but remind me about your second and last question, because I
The second.
Okay, I remember. I remember. The president, why doesn't he just get information and then do what needs to be done? Why does he have to spend money and so on? By the way, what the president is intending to do in this regard is not without precedent. You will remember the erstwhile Chief of the Defense Force, George Meiring. George Meiring approached the president of the time, Nelson Mandela, and gave him a document containing what he said was intelligence information about a number of people who were plotting to carry out a coup against President Mandela's government. They included his own deputy, George Meiring's deputies, General Spiwenyanda, and others. And President Mandela appointed a retired judge. The rest is history. He's competent, that retired judge, to weigh this purported intelligence against other sources which he is competent to invite people connected with those sources to give him information, to see if the information that was given to President Mandela can be confirmed or deconfirmed. So the president is not an omnipotent being who just gets information and decides what to do. He has to try to act with the benefit of the input and advice of competent persons. So this information is critical. It's critical, I am sure. Its criticality justifies the appointment of a retired judge and not to take a position which says, let's save money by asking the president to sit at his house and decide what to do with after he has read the information given to him. That was the second part of your question. The third part?
The third part was that the war in Ukraine has divided the North and the South, and this will continue. And are you perhaps going to engage the other group as well, or other countries that are part of this conflict, so to put it, or have influence, like Russia, Ukraine, and China, which is trying to mediate?
Well, firstly, by participating in international fora where this matter is being discussed, it means we are engaging everybody else, because everybody has the opportunity to engage us on the position we take. I think this question you are asking is partly answered by what I told you about the discussion I had with my counterpart in the US before, and the actions that were subsequently taken, which meant engaging Russia. By the way, Russia has a view, for instance, about our explanation of votes. We were saying in jest to our American counterparts, the Russians were not happy at all with one of our explanation of votes. And we said, the fact that, in jest, of course, you are not happy with some of the people we have said and done at the UN, and the Russians are also not happy, must mean that we must be getting something right. The fact that both of you are not happy. That was said in jest, but I'm saying we continue to engage many other parties. I'll give you an example now. You will have noticed that the president of France has made a public statement calling on Europe to consider coming at this issue of the conflict in Ukraine from a position of what he called strategic autonomy. He said we must come at it as Europeans from a position of strategic autonomy. I tried to understand what he means by that, and I found some affinities between that position he's articulating of strategic autonomy with what we are saying about active non-alignment. So certainly you would be interested in having discussions, for instance, with the French to say, what does this mean? And what does this mean in relation to what needs to be done to bring about peace in Ukraine? You will have seen that the Chinese have also released a paper, Reflections on Peacemaking. We would want to engage that thinking which comes through in their paper. In my discussions with the National Security Advisor, I said to him, you are USA, there is China, there is Russia, there is Ukraine. We are now in the post-Cold War era. Do you realize that the polarities and antagonisms of the Cold War era are actually coming back? Yes. I say, but then the responsibility we have is to make sure that we don't see a repeat of those antagonisms. We are agreed about that in principle. To me, it also must mean that a country like China and the United States must be sensitized to the role, to the responsibility they have given their place in the world today, be it the world in economic terms or political terms or in peacemaking terms. They must be sensitized to carry the load of responsibility which is consonant with their bigness. They can also be standing in corners crying about what is happening. They have to engage each other on these issues. And the rest of us, we will also engage with them, but we are also available to do what I'm just saying now, sensitize them to how best they can play their own role, because they carry a bigger responsibility. That is where history has placed them. In our case, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. I'm going to restrict all the other journalists with questions to just one per each. Otherwise, we're not going to finish today. So, John, New York Times, please go ahead. One question, please.
Yes, thank you. My question, Prof. In speaking with U.S. officials, some of them have characterized the South Africa-U.S. relationship currently at a low point. How would you characterize the state of the relationship at this moment?
Prof, I don't know if you want to deal with that.
No. I was going to ask the
DG.
The DG to deal with that.
DG Dambo.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, John, for the question. Of course, I mean the reason why we sent a team and an envoy led by Prof. Mufamadi was because we're quite aware that the relationships are not where it needs to be because of some of the miscommunication that took place. But in the end, I do think that what came through very clearly was a deep sense from many of the, in fact, most of the people we spoke to, whether it was the senators or people from in government, that this is the relationship that they value just as much as we valued it, and they wanted it to work. That was expressed very, very clearly to us. And that's why it was important, as the Prof has pointed out, that we engage about how we value the relationship, that we are indeed actively non-aligned, and that some of the issues that may have given rise to perceptions of being non-aligned were then dealt with quite effectively in the manner in which we engage with them. So the engagements were robust, they were frank, but in the end, I think, served to strengthen the partnership and the relationship. One can just see from the Secretary Blinken's statement last night about the strength of the relationship and that they value the relationship with South Africa. So I do think that this particular envoy's visit and the manner in which we engaged with all the stakeholders served to improve the relationship and also the mood, both on the Hill but also within government. Thanks. Please, Clayson, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, DG. Deputy Minister Bottas, you want to weigh in on this before I take another question?
Hi, hello, Sir Clayson. Yes, I think let me just fortify what the Director General have indicated. We have a strategic bilateral relationship with the United States, which is obviously pivoted by three bilateral mechanisms: the strategic dialogue, the working group for Africa and global affairs, and your annual bilateral consultations. And I think evident to the nature of our relationship, Clayson, we managed over the past financial year have dialogues, that was underpinned by all three of those structured bilateral mechanisms. So I think that is obviously very positive. And I must add that one of our foreign policy priorities imbues us to deepen cooperation with the more industrialized North. And we obviously value this strategic relationship with the USA in regards to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DM. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Forgive me if I'm not. One question, please.
Hello, Clayson. It's Nkululeko Ncane here from the City Press newspaper. Hello. My question is, I feel the Prof left me at a bit of a bend during his opening remarks, and maybe this might just tie in with his answer, and maybe might just want to elaborate on it. I want to find out what it is that the US could possibly, help us with regarding something that we would have told them about, right? And I'm talking about, the docking of the Russian vessel. What is the discussions in your meetings around this, and what kind of information is the US actually going to share on a process that you actually already told them about? I'm just curious, can you just give some clarity regarding what information should we expect from the US regarding the docking of the vessel that will help our process? Thank you.
Well, the terms of reference on matters like this are very straightforward. You are looking for people who may assist you to know what happened. If they also have the possibility to tell you why it happened and who are the parties that were responsible for what happened to happen, it's that kind of thing. So I'm sure the Americans will look at the questions and ask themselves if the questions that the retired judge once answered have make them a relevant contributor to the process. I hope this answers your question.
It does, Prof. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nkosinati, one question, please.
Good day, guys. I'll be very brief. Nkosinathi Shazi from Power FM News. Prof, in the discussions with the United States, did the ICC's warrant of arrest matter, was it raised? Of course, BRICS will be held in South Africa. There is an expectation that the Russian president will be here. So I just wanted to find out, is the United States expecting South Africa to act on the warrant of arrest? Thank you very much.
DG, you will add to my answer, because I know it won't go all the way to responding to what is being asked. I just want to paint a little bit of a backdrop. When this matter came up for discussion, it was not just about Mr. Putin, will he be in South Africa, will you arrest him, and so on. The question really was broader than that. Is the ICC process of assistance to what we are trying to do and the conflict between Ukraine and Russia? And what is it that our respective countries can do to make sure that if it is of assistance, that assistance is given by the ICC. If it is not, what is it that we can do to make sure that the ICC positions itself in a way that it becomes part of the solution to the problems? Now, this made it possible for us to recall discussions we've had with them before, as bilaterally. That was at the turn of this century, around 2002, 2001, when we were discussing Iraq with them bilaterally. I'm talking about government, not necessarily the current administration. I'm talking about government and the issues of the current administration being the successor in title and so on. And we were saying at the time, we were concerned that they were not intending to be party to the Rome Statute, because given the role we expect them to play in the post-Cold War world, we think that it's important that they ensure that they give themselves the moral authority to influence what happens at the ICC, so that they can join hands with every other country which is party to the Rome Statute. Of course, they took their own sovereign decision not to be party to the Rome Statute. We took our decision to be party to the Rome Statute. So it becomes one of those issues which, between us and them, the question will always be, how do we manage our differences on such that they don't stand in the way of the search for a solution to the problems. We will do what we can from within the ICC to make the ICC helpful to the rest of the world on questions like this. And in the spirit of what I told you earlier, they think that they can contribute to that process from outside the ICC. That's another matter on which we agree to disagree. But DG, you may want to talk a little bit, give this a little bit more detailed flash.
Thank you, Prof. I do think that you've outlined the issues quite well. On the specific actions South Africa will take, that is a process being led by the Deputy President's office. It's not been concluded yet. And I'm sure once that has been done, the media will also get a sense of what the approach will be in terms of South African President Putin in particular. But, just to underscore the fact that it did arise in a way that gave rise to a very good discussion, an agreement, ironically, after many years of trying to get that there needs to be a fair and equal implementation of international law. This is something that the US and others didn't recognize as a big problem before, but I do think that they see that now. What we underscored was South Africa's position was that we needed instruments like the ICC, in that emerging economies like ours do not have big economies or big armies. We need instruments of global governance to keep big powers accountable. And this is something that we discussed with them, and they tended to agree that a bigger discussion is needed, and that the erstwhile antipathy to instruments like this may need to be reviewed. And so we will take this discussion a bit forward as we go ahead. So, Prof, I do think you covered the depth of the discussion quite well.
Thank you very much, Prof. and DG. Gabriele, one question, please.
Hi, thank you so much. Gabrielle Steinhauser from the Wall Street Journal. If indeed this inquiry finds that the Lady R picked up weapons that were taken to Russia, do you think that based on South African law and its non-aligned position, it would have been morally and potentially legally wrong to deliver these weapons? And if so, what will be the consequences that people or institutions involved in this alleged weapon supply would...
All right, we cut out of that briefing by the Special Envoys, and we'll continue then to bring you analysis on it later on in our bulletin. But let's take...